I found out my husband had been quietly controlling our money for years, and instead of confronting him, I did something worse. I learned everything, stayed silent, and waited until he couldn't take it back. My name is Amy, 34, and until last year, I thought my marriage worked. Not because it was passionate. Not because it was perfect. It worked because nothing ever felt out of place. Robert handled the money. That's just how it had always been. If a bill needed paying, it was done. If something needed budgeting, he already had a plan. I never had to remind him, never had to follow up. Things just moved. And I told myself that meant I was lucky. I worked too. Same hours, same level of stress. I just didn't touch the finances as much. Not because I couldn't, because he was already doing it. At least, that's what I believed. Looking back, I can see how clean it all was. Too clean. Every time I asked something simple, hey, how much do we have saved? Or are we good for that trip next month? He'd answer without hesitation. We're fine. It's handled. You don't need to worry about it. He never shut me down. That's what made it easy to accept. He just never actually included me. And I didn't push. Because pushing would have meant admitting something felt off. And I didn't have proof of that. Just a feeling I kept ignoring. Until one night I didn't. It was a Tuesday. Nothing special. I was working from home, finishing something up late. Robert had already gone to bed. I needed a file he said he had saved on his laptop. A document for something work-related. Nothing important. I didn't even hesitate when I opened it. No suspicion. No second thoughts. Just convenience. His email was already logged in. And I wish I could say I stumbled into something obvious. Something dramatic. I didn't. It was quiet. Folders. That's what I noticed first. Too many of them. Organized. Labeled. Some normal. Some not. Names that didn't match anything I recognized. At first, I thought it was just work. Something I didn't understand. But then I saw one labeled with initials I didn't recognize. I clicked it. And that's when everything shifted. Statements. Bank accounts. Transfers. All under his name. None of them connected to anything I'd ever seen. I didn't react right away. I just kept scrolling. One account became two. Two became five. Then more. Different banks. Different balances. Some with amounts that didn't make sense, not because they were small. Because they were bigger than what I thought we had. Much bigger. I remember sitting there, staring at the screen, trying to line it up with the life I thought I was living. It didn't match. Not even close. This wasn't extra savings. This was separation. Careful, intentional separation. Money moved in ways that made it invisible to anything shared. And the longer I looked, the clearer it became. This wasn't something he forgot to mention. This wasn't disorganization. This was planned. Over years. Every account, every transfer, every detail, it all pointed to one thing. He didn't want me involved. Not just uninformed. Excluded. I leaned back in the chair and just sat there. No panic. No tears. Just quiet. Because once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. And suddenly, everything made sense. The vague answers. The way he'd always handle it. The way I never had access unless I asked, and even then, only to what he chose to show. I wasn't part of the system. I was outside it. Living next to it. I closed the laptop. Slowly. Like if I moved too fast, it would turn into something bigger than I could deal with. I walked to the bedroom. He was asleep, exactly the way he always slept. Calm. Unbothered. Like nothing in his world had changed. And I stood there for a second, just looking at him. Trying to connect the person in that bed with everything I had just seen. I couldn't. That was the moment something shifted. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quietly. I didn't wake him up. I didn't ask questions. I didn't confront him. Because the truth was, I already had my answer. If I brought it up then, right there, I'd get explanations. Excuses. Carefully worded answers that would only show me what he wanted me to see. And I wasn't interested in that anymore. I wanted the full picture. So I went to bed. Laid there next to him. And stared at the ceiling. I remember thinking something very clearly. Not emotional. Not angry. Just certain. If he had been building this without me for years, then I was already behind. And confronting him wouldn't fix that. It would just warn him. And I wasn't ready to lose. So I did the only thing that made sense in that moment. Nothing. The next morning, I acted exactly the same. Same routine. Same conversations. Same tone. Morning. Morning. Coffee's ready. Thanks. Like nothing had changed. But everything had. Because now I was paying attention. Not just to what he said. To what he avoided. The way he answered questions without actually answering them. The way he redirected things just enough to keep me comfortable. I started noticing patterns. Small ones at first. Then bigger ones. And the more I saw, the clearer it became. I had never really been part of the decisions in my own life. I had just been included in the version he allowed me to see. That realization didn't break me. It didn't make me emotional. It made me careful. Because once you understand you've been living inside something controlled, you stop reacting. And you start observing. I didn't change overnight. I didn't suddenly become someone else. I just adjusted. I asked more questions. Casually. I paid closer attention when he talked about money. I listened to what he didn't say. And slowly, I started building something of my own. Not revenge. Not yet. Just understanding. Because I knew one thing for sure. If I was going to do anything about this, I couldn't do it blindly. And I couldn't do it loudly. I had to do it the same way he did. Quiet. Careful. Planned. So no. I didn't confront my husband when I found out. I didn't argue. I didn't demand answers. I didn't give him the chance to fix the version of the truth he'd been feeding me. I gave him something else. Time. Time to keep thinking I didn't know. Time to keep doing exactly what he'd always done. And time for me to learn everything he never meant to show me. Because the truth is, that night didn't end my marriage. It changed my role in it. And from that point on, I wasn't the one being managed anymore. I was paying attention. Once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. And once I understood how Robert handled money, I stopped thinking like his wife. I started thinking like someone watching a system from the outside, trying to map it. I didn't need access yet. I needed clarity. So I slowed everything down. I stopped asking emotional questions. No more, are we okay? Or can we afford this? Instead, I asked things that sounded practical. Small. Harmless. Hey, how do you usually organize our accounts? If something happened, would I even know where everything is? What's the easiest way to track bills if you're busy? He never got defensive. That was the problem. He answered everything, just not completely. Enough to sound open. Never enough to actually include me. But now I could hear the gaps. And once you hear the gaps, you start filling them in yourself. The first real shift happened about 3 weeks after I found those accounts. We were sitting in the living room. TV on, neither of us really watching. I kept my tone light. I've been thinking, I said, I should probably be more involved in our finances. He glanced at me, just for a second. Not surprised. Just measuring. Why no? I shrugged. I don't know. I just feel like I should understand more. It's kind of irresponsible that I don't. That landed better than anything emotional ever would have. He nodded slowly. Yeah, that's fair. No resistance. No hesitation. Just acceptance. Like he had already decided how much he was willing to give. The next weekend, he sat down with me at the kitchen table. Laptop open. Calm. Organized. This is what we use for bills, he said, clicking through one account. This one's for savings. These are the recurring payments. Everything looked normal. Clean. Controlled. And incomplete. I didn't react. I leaned in, nodded, asked questions. Okay, and this covers everything? Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much. There it was. I smiled. Makes sense. Because pushing would have ended the conversation. And I wasn't there to push. I was there to stay inside the room. From that point on, I made myself part of the process. Not all at once. Gradually. I started handling small things. Hey, I can pay this one. Do you want me to set up that bill? Should we combine these accounts to make it easier? I framed everything the same way. Efficiency. Convenience. Simplifying. He liked that. He liked anything that sounded structured. Predictable. Controlled. And what he didn't realize was that every small change brought me closer to understanding the bigger picture. I started tracking things on my own. Nothing obvious. Just notes. Dates. Transfers. Patterns. When money moved. When it didn't. What lined up and what didn't. I never touched the accounts I wasn't supposed to see. I didn't need to, because now I understood how he thought. And once you understand someone's habits, you can predict their behavior. Around that time, I met Anna Hart. I told Robert the first was grabbing coffee after work. Which wasn't a lie. I just didn't tell him why. Anna wasn't introduced as anything serious. Just someone I knew who was good with finances. We met at a small place near the water. Quiet. Out of the way. I didn't dump everything on her. I kept it simple. I think my husband is managing money in a way I don't fully understand, I said. And I need to know what I should be looking for. She didn't ask emotional questions. She asked practical ones. Do you have access to shared accounts? Do you know how assets are titled? Do you have documentation of your contributions? That last one stayed with me. Documentation. Proof. Not feelings. Not assumptions. Proof. I left that meeting with something I didn't have before. Direction. After that, everything became intentional. Every conversation with Robert had a purpose. Every question had a reason. I stopped reacting completely. No frustration. No curiosity. No emotion. Just interest. Calm, consistent interest. And he relaxed. That was the key. The more comfortable he felt, the less careful he became. There was one moment I remember clearly. We were going over some routine payments, nothing important. And he said, casually, we should probably consolidate a few things. It'd be easier. I nodded. Yeah, that makes sense. And I let him explain it. Step by step. What he didn't realize was that consolidation didn't just make things easier. It made things traceable, connected, less isolated. Exactly what I needed. Over the next few months, things shifted in ways he didn't notice. Accounts became more visible. Paper trails became clearer. Shared responsibilities increased. Not enough to alarm him, just enough to change the structure. Quietly. At the same time, I started organizing everything on my end. Tax documents, payment histories, anything that showed my role in our financial life. Anything that connected me to what he had tried to separate. I wasn't guessing anymore. I was building something, piece by piece. And the strangest part? We didn't fight once. Not once. No arguments. No tension. If anything, we seemed better, more aligned, more cooperative. Because from his perspective, nothing was wrong. His system was still working. He was still in control. He just didn't realize that control was shifting. By the time he started noticing that I was more involved, it felt normal, natural, like something that had always been there. And that's how I knew it was working. Because the best changes don't feel like changes at all. They feel inevitable. It took almost a year. A full year of watching, learning, adjusting. A year of letting him believe everything was the same, while I quietly made sure it wasn't. And by the end of it, I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't guessing. I wasn't reacting. I understood everything that mattered. And more importantly, I had positioned myself in a way that couldn't be undone overnight. I remember sitting alone one afternoon, looking at everything I had gathered. All the documents. All the patterns. All the connections. And realizing something very simple. I didn't need to confront him to win. I just needed to stop playing by the version of the rules he gave me. Because the moment I understood the system, I stopped being outside of it. I stepped inside. And once I was inside, it was already too late for him to fix it. By the time I asked for a divorce, I wasn't angry anymore. That part had passed somewhere in the middle of that year, somewhere between understanding what he'd built and realizing how long I'd been living next to it without knowing. What I felt instead was clarity. And that made everything easier. I didn't pick a dramatic moment. No big fight. No emotional buildup. It was a Tuesday night. We had just finished dinner. Plates still in the sink. The house was quiet in that normal, predictable way it always was. I walked into the living room where Robert was sitting, scrolling through his phone. Hey, I said. He looked up. Yeah, I think we should get a divorce. I said it the same way I would have said anything else. Calm. Even. Final. At first, he didn't react. Not because he didn't hear me. Because it didn't register. Wait. What? He said, sitting up a little straighter. I'm serious, I said. I don't want to stay married. He stared at me like I'd skipped 10 steps in a conversation we never had. Where's this coming from? That question told me everything. Because from his perspective, nothing had changed. No fights. No distance. No warning signs. Just this. And for a second, I almost envied that version of reality. The one where everything felt normal. I sat down across from him. You've been managing everything for years, I said. Money. Decisions. Structure. He frowned slightly. Yeah, and I was never actually part of it. That's not true, he said immediately. You could have been involved whenever you wanted. I nodded. I asked. You answered. But you never included me. That's not, he stopped himself, then tried again. I was handling things. That's different. No, I said quietly. It's not. That's when I saw it. Not anger. Confusion. Real confusion. Because in his mind, he hadn't done anything wrong. He had just structured things his way. And I had allowed it. For years. So this is about money? He asked. It's about control. I wasn't controlling you. You were controlling everything around me. That's not the same thing. I held his gaze. It is when I'm living in it. There was a long pause after that. The kind where both people know the conversation isn't going back to normal. He leaned back, running a hand over his face. I don't understand why you didn't say something earlier. I almost smiled. Because that was the point. I did, I said. Just not in the way you expected. After that, things moved quickly. Not emotionally. Legally. Structured. Exactly the way he liked things. I had already spoken to James Moore. Quietly. Weeks before. I didn't walk into that office asking what I could take. I asked what I could prove. That was the difference. And once I showed him everything, the documentation, the timelines, the way finances had been handled, he didn't need long to understand what I was doing. Do you want this to be clean? He asked me. Yes. And strategic? I nodded. He didn't ask anything else after that. When Robert realized I had already started the process, that's when the shift happened. Not panic. Not anger. Just pressure. Like something underneath him had moved slightly out of place. "You've been planning this?" he asked. "I've been preparing," I said. "For how long?" I didn't answer that. I didn't need to. The discussions about assets were exactly what I expected. He tried to separate things. "This account is mine. That investment was handled separately. These weren't shared." He spoke the same way he always had. Structured. Confident. Certain. The only difference now was I understood everything he was saying. And everything he wasn't. "Those funds were accumulated during the marriage," I said at one point, sliding a document across the table. He looked at it. Then at me. "That's not how that works. It is when it can be traced." Silence. Then another document. And another. Not aggressive. Not emotional. Just prepared. I never raised my voice. I never accused him of anything. I didn't need to. Because this wasn't about exposing him. It was about making sure his version of control didn't hold up anymore. The process wasn't dramatic. No courtroom scenes. No speeches. Just meetings. Paperwork. Adjustments. And slowly, piece by piece, the structure he had built started to shift. Not collapse. Just change shape. In ways he couldn't fully control anymore. In the end, I didn't take everything. That was never the goal. But I walked away with more than he expected. More than he had planned for. More than he had ever shown me. The last time I saw him was a few weeks after everything was finalized. We met briefly to exchange a few remaining things. Nothing important. Just closure. He looked different. Not broken. Just unsettled. Like something still didn't make sense to him. "I keep thinking about it," he said at one point. "Trying to figure out when this started." I didn't answer right away. Because the truth was, it didn't start when I asked for the divorce. It didn't even start when I found the accounts. It started the moment I realized I wasn't part of my own life. "You didn't outplay me," he said finally. I looked at him. "No," I said. "I didn't." And that was the truth. Because I didn't beat him at anything. I just stopped being blind. After that, there wasn't much else to say. We went our separate ways. No drama. No final argument. Just distance. And now, when I think about everything, I don't feel proud. But I don't feel guilty either. What I feel is settled. Because I didn't destroy anything. I didn't sabotage his life. I didn't take something that wasn't already part of mine. I just made sure I understood the system I had been living in before I chose to leave it. There's something strange about realizing you've been living inside someone else's version of reality. Not lied to. Not exactly. Just managed. Adjusted. Kept comfortable enough not to ask the wrong questions. And for a long time, I think I accepted that. Not because I was weak. But because it was easier. Easier to trust. Easier to assume. Easier to believe that handled meant shared. But once you see the gap, once you realize how much of your life exists just outside your reach, you can't go back to not seeing it. And the hardest part isn't the anger. It's the silence that comes after. The moment where you have to decide. Do you confront it? Or do you understand it first? I chose to understand. And maybe that makes me calculating. Maybe it makes me cold. But I don't regret it. Because if I had reacted the moment I found out, I would have gotten answers. Not the truth. And I didn't want answers anymore. I wanted clarity. Even if it meant losing everything I thought I had. So I guess what I'm still wondering is, was I wrong for staying quiet and playing along until I had the advantage? Or was that the only way I was ever going to truly see what my marriage actually was?